Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching America 360 on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines. Providence police have detained a person of interest in the Brown University shooting. 2 students are dead, 9 others injured. Classes for fall 2025 are now cancelled and a shelter-in-place has been lifted as police continue the investigation. President Donald Trump warns of very serious retaliation after U.S. citizens are killed in an attack in Syria, blamed on Islamic State. Trump says Syria's president is devastated by the attack and stresses Syrian forces are fighting alongside U.S. troops. The United States Citizenship and Immigration Services introduced stricter photo requirements for immigration applications to prevent identity fraud, with photos no longer accepted if they are older than 3 years. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres condemns a horrific drone attack on Bangladeshi peacekeepers in Sudan that killed 6 and wounds 8 others. Guterres warns that such attacks may constitute war crimes and says those responsible must be held accountable. The United States lifts sanctions on Brazilian Supreme Court Judge Alexandre de Moraes, who was initially targeted for overseeing a criminal case involving an ally of Trump. Polls have opened in Chile for a presidential runoff election that could mark the country's sharpest shift to the right since the end of military rule in 1990. New South Wales Police Commissioner declares Bondi Beach attack that killed 12 individuals as a terrorist attack, says the Jewish community was targeted and the attackers used long arms. Thailand has declared a curfew along parts of its southeastern coast as fighting with Cambodia spreads to coastal areas of a disputed border region. And let's start with the top focus here at America 360. Providence police have detained now a person of interest in connection with the deadly shooting at Brown University. 2 students are confirmed dead and 9 others were injured, with several in critical condition. Officials warn the toll could rise. The shooting happened near the Barris and Holly building during exams on Saturday around 4:05 p.m. local time. A shelter-in-place order for the campus has been lifted, though parts of Brown remain restricted as officers secure the scene. Brown University has cancelled all remaining fall 2025 classes, exams and assignments. Students are free to leave with on-campus support available for those who stay. More than 400 law enforcement personnel were deployed as the search continues for the suspect, described as a male dressed in black. U.S. President Donald Trump has been briefed on the incident. And joining me on the discussion is David K. Johnston, who's an American author from New York. Thank you, David, for joining me in this discussion. David, firstly, how do you react to another university coming under attack by a shooter?
Well, this is a very serious problem, and in the classrooms where I teach at Rochester Institute of Technology, the first thing I do at the beginning of each semester is, what if we have to blockade that door to keep somebody out of the room? We have not had any incidents at my school, but America has had 389 mass shootings just this year, with more than 2,000 people injured or killed. This is a serious problem, and it's related to this cockamamie U.S. Supreme Court decision some years ago that is leading to a country in which you can openly carry or concealed carry in many parts of the country military-style assault weapons.
What do you think is preventing the U.S. then from implementing tougher gun laws?
Well, this is an extraordinary development. Surveys show that about 90% of Americans believe in fundamental rules about where and when you can carry a gun and who can have one. But the gun lobby, the manufacturers, are such major contributors in Washington. And the threat from what are called Second Amendment absolutists is so strong that Congress just won't act. One of the things I tell my students, in fact, is that if you're going to be an absolutist on the Second Amendment, which does not discuss guns but arms, that I want a personal nuclear weapon that I can carry in a backpack. We make them that small now because no one will mess with me. And I do that to point out the absurdity of the argument that citizens should be allowed to walk around with weapons designed solely to kill because of the enormous velocity of the bullets that they fire.
David, now, like you said, 389 mass shootings, repeated shootings on campuses. There was one at Kentucky. There have been others at Florida State University. There are a couple if we start listing them. Why are there no lessons learned? Such instances are repeating time and again within a span of a few months. Why no lessons learned?
I think the problem is not so much the lesson isn't learned as the lack of political will among the elected lawmakers. And very few people are going to vote on the Second Amendment, and those who do are going to be people who want an armed society. They're ahistorical, by the way. I mean, for example, in Dodge City, Kansas, that is the iconic city when America was expanding to the West. Everyone was required to check their guns with the sheriff. You were not allowed to walk around with a gun. But there's this ethos in America that having a gun, makes you a real American, a real man. If I walk into a store and there are people walking around with guns, I leave because I don't know if they're there to protect themselves or they're there to make trouble. And all around the world, we're seeing these incidents of violence, although the U.S. is way out of proportion to every other country. And I think all of that reflects deepening anger over a world in which the distribution of economic resources is making for enormous numbers of people with fantastic fortunes, as many, many people struggle just to feed themselves and keep a roof over their heads. I think you're seeing frustration at our failure to design a system to distribute wealth and income, which we're very good at creating as a species at this stage of human development, but we're doing a very bad job of distribution. And I think it's leading to a lot of anger, blaming others on the basis of their religion or even as in America, their education.
All right, for now, David, that was a discussion that I wanted to have as far as the shooting in Brown was concerned. But do stay on, there are some more developments now coming in as far as the US military role in Syria is concerned. There was the recent attack in Syria which claimed the lives of 2 US service members and 1 American civilian, has renewed focus on the ongoing presence of US forces in the region. The attack, attributed to an alleged member of the Islamic State, occurred in central Syria and marked the first fatal assault on US personnel since the ousting of Syrian President Bashar Assad in December 2024. US military forces have been stationed in Syria for over a decade, initially to combat ISIS and later to counter the flow of Iranian-backed fighters and weapons into the country. Despite ISIS losing control of vast territories in 2019, sleeper cells continue to carry out attacks. While US military operations in Syria have evolved over time, President Donald Trump's administration has reaffirmed the commitment to defeating ISIS. The US maintains a presence of around 900 troops in Syria, working alongside Kurdish-led forces to ensure regional stability while avoiding a costly large-scale military engagement. And I'd now like to request David to join us back into the discussion here. David, thank you for staying with us firstly. Now, Donald Trump has vowed to retaliate. What does that possibly mean? The US cannot have its boots on the ground, So there's likely going to be strikes that we can expect. But with limited information on ISIS, how is Trump going to retaliate as he has vowed to?
Well, Donald will for sure call in some kind of military action. And the question is, will it be proportional? That's the fundamental principle in diplomacy, is proportionality of response. But frankly, I think it's important to remember how we got into the state that we're in. After the U.S. went in with its allies to remove the leader in Iraq, and we told military officers there, just don't fight back, just surrender, we'll take care of you. And they were all led to believe through back channels that they would continue to serve. The U.S. Proconsul, Paul Johnson, fired every single military officer in the Saddam Hussein regime. So needing a job and an income, they went out and basically set themselves up. And that's how we got the Islamic State, through absolute incompetent civilian actions following the fall of Saddam Hussein's regime. And the Syrian civil war is part of this. We shouldn't be surprised that there are going to be continued relatively small acts of violence, harrying governments as opposed to overthrowing them, in the aftermath of what went on, where Russia helped the Bashar al-Assad family for 50 years suppress their own people. There are going to be more incidents like this, and the question is, does Donald Trump have the wisdom and insight to see this in context? And unfortunately, one of the main features of Donald, who I've known and covered for almost 40 years, is his appalling ignorance about events.
And what does this really mean about the U.S. bases in the region now?
Well, America has about 900 armed troops in Syria, primarily in the Kurdish part of that country. There is no specific headquarters for the Islamic State that can be gone after, but I'm sure that American military planners are presenting Trump with several options for buildings to blow up, other actions to take. I don't think they will recommend, and in fact, they'll try to find ways to steer Trump away from any idea of getting us involved in some sort of larger land conflict. They're going to promote proportionality and lethality, very popular word with Trump these days, rather than some blunderbuss approach to this attack, which is on 2 soldiers and 1 individual. It's not blow it out of proportion.
But, a larger question, do you think America's, US's intervention in Syria is hypocritical, given that previously it had withdrawn from the region?
Oh, I think that U.S. foreign policy is full of all sorts of things like that. The United States made itself into an empire in the post-World War II era. Americans don't want to talk about that. They don't want to think about that. But history will look back on this era and talk about the American empire post-World War II. And when you're an empire, to maintain your position, you do lots of awful things that you probably shouldn't do, and you provoke responses, as we've seen with these Islamic State attacks. This is not the only attack, it's just the only fatal attack on American soldiers overseas. We're the only country in the world that we know of, more than 800 military bases in other countries. Nobody else has that. The Russians have a few bases overseas. Syria used to be very important to them because it would represent a warm water port for their military ships. The British have a few, but this is an almost unique position in the world. And if you're going to have troops in lots of locations, there's going to be conflicts.
But do you think there is going to be an increased intervention of the U.S. in West Asia after Trump vowing retaliation now?
I think that is a significant risk. But I don't know what Trump will do. I mean, Donald is so lacking in knowledge. If you asked him, what is the Nakba? How did Israel become an independent state? How did the al-Assad family come to rule Syria, he doesn't know any of this history or background, even though, of course, he claims to be the world's greatest expert on 22 subjects, including that he knows more about the ISIS than the American military generals. So it's hard to predict about that, but I'm sure that American military leaders who are deeply schooled in diplomacy and de-escalation are going to work to try and persuade him not to create a bigger problem, especially since he wants to be known as the president of peace.
All right. Thank you for that detailed discussion. You're at NewsX World, David. And moving on now, viewers, let's tell you news on US's immigration rules. The United States Citizenship and Immigration Services has tightened its rules on photographs for immigration applications to curb identity fraud. Under the new policy, applicants can no longer use photos older than 3 years. USCIS will also reject images submitted directly by applicants, accepting only photographs taken by the agency or authorized service providers. Previously, applicants could reuse images up to 10 years old, which is a practice that originated during the COVID pandemic. USCIS officials explained that relying on older photos undermined their ability to verify identities, as physical appearances can change significantly over time. The revised rules apply to almost all immigration benefits except for certain forms like naturalization and permanent residency applications, which already require new biometrics. USCIS retains the right to request fresh photographs at any time to ensure accurate identity verification and strengthen security measures across the immigration system. And I welcome Matthew Wadham, who's an American journalist and author, to join us in the discussion here. Hi, thanks Matthew for joining us here at NewsX World. Matthew, it was earlier the vetting of social media accounts, and now the USCIS requires latest photographs. But do you think that is a foolproof measure to prevent entry of anybody that shouldn't be allowed?
I think that requiring up-to-date photos is probably a good idea. The directive from CIS says that the photos can't be more than 3 years old, and that seems pretty reasonable to me. Like, you can't go and apply for a passport and use a photo that's more than 3 years old. It has to be a lot more recent. So that
Sure.
strikes me as pretty reasonable. Now, the other measures that the United States has announced with respect to immigrant visas, such as being able to vet their social media, that seems pretty intrusive. And I wonder if people are actually if would-be visitors to the United States are going to cooperate, because that is really asking a lot.
No, I do agree when you say that photographs should be recent, but do you think having that rule to use only 36-month-old photos is going to prevent identity fraud? I mean, people could change their appearances overnight and give a wrong image or one that's not accurate. So how is that a foolproof measure in preventing those who US wants to limit from entering the country?
There's no surefire way to prevent fraud in the use of photographs, but requiring that the photo is fairly recent seems like a modest first step, but you're never going to eliminate all fraud. That's just not possible.
All right. How do you respond to some of the criticism that is coming in for the US as far as controlling the entry of refugees or immigrants is concerned? There might be people who are in dire need of asylum, for example.
I think what has happened is the Trump administration has gotten, I I don't know that the U.S. government is no longer accepting asylum applications. It might be making them more difficult, but I think the U.S. government has gotten tired um, of the United States being, one of the very few places that people can go to when they're in trouble, and there's a backlash against that, and that is part of why I suspect President Trump has revoked temporary protected status for countries such as Haiti, because he thinks there's too many of these people in the United States, and that they're not genuine refugees, and that things in their countries are not that bad, or not so bad, that these people cannot return. So I think that the Trump administration's reluctance to take a lot of new immigrants is something that President Trump campaigned on in the 2024 presidential election campaign, and I think that he views himself as delivering on that promise. I'm sure that there will be other policies that we can't foresee that he's going to tighten up as well in the future.
All right, thank you, Matthew, for speaking to me in this conversation, but I request you to stay on as we move on. Viewers, a redistriction in Texas, which once seemed poised to secure 5 new GOP-held congressional seats, is now facing setbacks. Recent developments, including a shift in Latino voting patterns and strong Democratic performances in special election, have raised concerns for the Republican Party. Despite Donald Trump's improved standing with Latinos in 2024, his approval ratings have dropped significantly since then, particularly among Latino voters in Texas. Republicans have targeted 5 Democratic-held seats in Texas with the hopes of capitalizing on Trump's support, especially in majority Latino districts. However, recent polling and local shifts indicate that Democrats could reclaim some of those seats, including in South Texas, where discontent with the GOP's policies is growing. With national trends also favoring Democrats, especially among Latino voters, the GOP's hold on Texas may be less secure than they anticipated. The situation highlights the evolving dynamics in the state as both parties strategize for the 2026 midterms. And now moving on, viewers, to news from Chile. Polls have opened for a presidential runoff election that could mark the country's sharpest shift to the right since the end of military rule in 1990. Nearly 15.6 million registered voters are eligible to cast their ballots, with polling stations set to close at 6 in the evening local time. Initial results are expected shortly after. The runoff pits far-right Republican Party candidate Jose Antonio Cast against leftist coalition candidate Janet Jara. Jara led the first round in November, but Cast is expected to gain support from voters who backed other right-wing candidates, potentially pushing him past the 50% mark needed to win. The outcome of the vote is being closely watched, with analysts saying it could reshape Chile's political direction and economic policies in the years ahead. Let's listen in.
Estamos partiendo con esta jornada electoral. Hemos trabajado en las semanas previas para coordinar todos y cada uno de los aspectos que permitan efectivamente una buena jornada. La coordinación con los servicios públicos regionales, con carabineros y el ejército. Ya están constituyéndose las mesas a lo largo de todo el país. En el caso particular de la región metropolitana hemos visto una llegada progresiva de los vocales de mesa, de manera que creemos vamos a tener una muy buena jornada.
And I now request Matthew to join us back into the discussion here. Matthew, thank you for continuing to stay with us. Now the election in Chile is a rather polarizing one, and the Chileans seem to be frustrated between the two options that they have. If a right-wing president is elected, which is being predicted, how do you think the country's policies are going to shift?
I think that this conservative candidate, Jose Antonio Cast, I think that his signature policy is he wants to is mass deportation of illegal immigrants in Chile, and if he wins, then I don't see why that wouldn't happen, and that would be, you know, a lot of countries are, including the United States, think that mass immigration is no longer the way to go, and they want to have some control over how many people immigrate to their countries. And I think that Chile is it appears that Chile is part of this trend, and so you may see the country crack down on illegal immigration, and maybe also curtail lawful immigration to the country. But immigration appears to be the big issue in the Chilean presidential election.
All right. Well, thank you, Matthew, for joining me in this discussion. With that, I'll let you go. And viewers, with that, it's a wrap on America 360. Keep watching NewsX World for all breaking news updates.